Shalom and welcome to another edition of Parsha Talk. I'm Rabbi Elliot Malamet in Highland Park, New Jersey at the Highland Park Conservative Temple Congregation on Shemin Emet. Joining me are my good friends, Rabbi Barry Chesler, back from Israel, Solomon Schechter Day School of Long Island. Welcome back. We hope you had a wonderful, wonderful time.
With all due respect to the Parsha, Elliot, it was an amazing trip.
Amazing Parsha. Rabbi Jeremy Kalmanovsky in New York City, Anshe Chesed in New York City. And it's great to have you all. And we are saying hello to our good friends at Machane Rama, Berkshires, where this is being broadcast and rebroadcast and rebroadcast. And thank you to Mitch Murnick and all of the radio people at Camp Ramah in the Berkshires. We are so glad to be a part of your Hachana l'Shabbat, right? Where at this point on Friday afternoons or whenever this is being played, everybody is in the shower. And good thing that you are in the shower because it's been hot, I'm sure.
Oh my goodness.
We want to do something a little different for this Parsha Talk and focus on the period that we're in, the 3 weeks. It started with Shabbat Tammuz, the fast of the 17th of Tammuz, which was actually held on the 18th of Tammuz this year because 17 Tammuz was a Shabbat, which started a week ago last Sunday. So we're already well within the 3-week period. We had the first haftarot of admonition, and we are going to be having the second one, and then the chazon parsha, the haftarah. What we're saying is that the calendar, the Jewish calendar, brings us into contact with these individuals. There are 3 individuals. There's a prophet Yirmiyahu, Jeremiah. There's a prophet Yeshayahu, and there's another prophet who we think also either had the name of Yeshayahu or was tacked into the book of Yeshayahu. Maybe his name was like Ed or something.
Myron. It was actually Myron.
Irving or whatever. But he's the guy that his prophecies are included at the end of the book of Isaiah from chapter 40 on, and there are various theories about who that could have been. But there are 3 individuals, they're prophets, Jeremiah, Isaiah, and the second Isaiah. And we have to think about what they're saying, how they're saying it. And first question would be, who are these people? What is a prophet? And what kind of, it's like Heschel wrote this book called The Prophets. I'm holding my copy up here. Jeremy, you have your copy there? Okay. And his first chapter is what manner of man is the prophet? And can we just dip into that for a second? Can we just talk about what manner of man is the prophet?
Before we do that, I think we want to just, for our listeners who may not be quite up on this, we talk about the 3 of rebuke, the 3 haftarah sections between the 17th of Tammuz and Tisha B'Av are negative excoriations. Jeremiah in 2 of them, and the very beginning for chapter 1 of Isaiah, they let the people have it with just the full dose of criticism about why the people, how the people have gone bad and how they have to turn around. And this is appropriate for this time of year because the 17th of Tammuz is a fast day, beginning the mourning period. Tisha B'Av is the nadir, I was going to say climax, but it's the bottom of that suffering period, commemorating the destruction of the temples, both temples, the first in 586 BCE, the second one in 70 CE, and all kinds of other bad stuff. And we as Jewish people, at some level, we talk about the bad stuff that our enemies did to us, and Nebuchadnezzar was terrible, and Vespasian was terrible, and at some level, we talk about the fact that we have gone wrong ourselves, and bad things happen to people. I don't think we would say directly as punishment, but certainly as consequence of having a bloody, cruel society. Lo and behold, you suffer exile when you have a cruel and vicious society. So that's what these haftarot are about. And now, as Elliot has raised the question, who are the people who deliver these messages?
Right. And so, I mean, can we give a kind of character sketch of, like a general character sketch of the The Bible has several of them. We have the major ones: Yirmiyahu, Yeshayahu, Yechezkel, Ezekiel, Jeremiah, Isaiah, and we have the minor prophets. They wouldn't want to be called minor by their mothers, by the
They
way.
were AAA.
Okay.
They're triple A.
But okay, so Heschel does say in the book, The Prophets, he says these people are totally engaged with the world. They're totally attuned to God. They are I don't want to say enraptured, but they are infused with what he calls the divine pathos, meaning they feel what God feels. They are human. They communicate with language, but through their remarkable talent, which we would identify as poetic talent, linguistic talent, they are able to convey the pathos, the feeling of God in their own vocabulary to the people. And that's not a popular thing to do sometimes, especially when God has some harsh things, or when they sense from God the impending doom of the people for their abandonment of God. Barry, you want to?
So, I mean, there are many different ways one could go. There's a wonderful essay by Shindal Goitein, one of the great historians of the Jewish people, in which he suggests that the book of Yonah, which we read on at Mincha Yom Kippur, is a dramatic portrayal of the dilemma of the prophet, who stands in a precipice, we would say today, although the expression in the Bible or rabbinic thought is he's in the gateway. He's trying to stem the breach. So the prophet, on one hand, has to deliver God's message to the people. And when the people get the message, they're not so happy to hear from God. His second job is to take the people's message back to God. And God is not so happy with the people's response, which doesn't leave the prophet with a lot of maneuverability. And it's what comes through in some of the prophets is very painful, a lonely existence, because you just can't get through. You can't get through to the people. You can't quite get through to God, because there's something wrong with the world in which you live that you can't control or contain. And I was thinking, listening to the beginning, that we don't really think of prophets as being old men. It seems to be a young man's job. And there are some female prophets, although none in Nevi'im Achronim, the portion of the prophets that have the name prophets. They appear in Sefer Melachim, the Book of Kings. But, I sometimes get the sense of moody adolescents who are enraged that the world seems to be amok and no one sees it but them.
Jeremy, I mean, are they charismatic figures? Are they? I mean, your own reflection on this, and maybe as a spring to this reflection, you might want to look at I mean the first verses of the first chapter of Jeremiah, where he says, "Beterem etzorcha babeten yedaticha." Before I created you in the womb, I selected you, and that kind of self-reflection from Jeremiah, who is projecting on to God the sense that God knew you, God knows me. It's I don't how do you understand that verse?
Well, Jeremiah is exactly that. He is. We would at some kind of clinical level think of him for the reason that you said, as a narcissist, because he thinks that he has this incredible charismatic gift, and that it is an agony to have this charismatic gift. In the course of the book, he says, there's a fire in my bones. Pitatani vayafat. You seduced me, and I was seduced. You gave me this message. I cannot bear it. I don't want to hear from you anymore. Because he's really he's an anguished character over this incredibly difficult thing that God has given him. In the what was in America the haftarot last week, this first chapter of Jeremiah, he says this line, which I just love so much. And if there are any of the Hanichim at Camp Ramah in the Berkshires listening to this, which I can only assume that there are, Jeremiah says, Hine lo yadati daber ki na'ar anochi. Oh God, I don't know how to, I can't talk. I'm just a young child. And God says, Vayomer Adonai Elai, al tomar na'ar anochi. Don't say I'm just a child, because wherever you go, I will send you, and you'll speak what I command you. Don't fear your enemies. Don't fear people who are your rivals, because I'm with you. This is just like Moses at the burning bush. God, really, I got some sheep to watch. I really can't do this. And God says to him in that Exodus chapter 3, who gave a person a mouth? Who gave you eyes? Who gave you, any of your capacities? You do have these capacities. The prophets are very charismatic people, but exactly as Barry said, they have that passionate fanaticism. First of all, Jeremiah and Isaiah, best writers in the Bible. I mean, they're amazing writers. Their poetic power is awesome.
Yeah.
And to open your ears and to open your heart to their poetic power, like it's just very moving. And to fail to do that is to miss a lot of the emotional core of Judaism. But it comes along with very, very fanatical, passionate people who are not open for compromise. Like if you believe that the Lord has spoken to you and has given you a message, and the people near to hear the message, you're not likely to say, guys, let's enter a negotiation. You'll get some things you want, and I'll get some things I want. No, they're saying they got the word from the Lord.
I want you to read the next verse, okay? Because it's okay. So we just read verses chapter 1, verse 7 and 8 in Jeremiah. I'll read and I'll get you to comment. Okay. So then in verse 9 it says, "Vayishlach Adonai et yado." This is Jeremiah saying, God put his hand. Vayaga al pi, touched my mouth. Vayomer, and God said, Vayomer Adonai Elai, Hine natati devarai beficha. I have put the words in your mouth. Okay, it's one thing to be a poet. It's one thing to be a prophet, but it's another thing to convey to the world, God touched me. God put his hand on my mouth. Put the words, it's like,
So that
words
is
out of my
the
mouth.
basic definition of charisma.
Yeah.
Of someone who is touched by God. And that's what gives the charismatic his power. But what I'd like to suggest is that perhaps prophecy is the flip side of free will. Most of us want to believe in free will, that we can make choices freely, sometimes wrong choices, but we're allowed to make them ourselves. And the prophet, in a sense, cannot make a choice because he is chosen by God. And, especially for young people, I think, I'm not that far removed, I hope, that when we're young, we're looking for a destiny, some way to fulfill our life's dreams and expectation. And I think it's a natural thing. There's this wonderful passage in Alfred Kazan's book, New York Jew, that in the 40s, Saul Bellow used to walk around the streets of New York as if his destiny was unfolding before him. But the prophet has no such destiny because his choice has been removed from him. And it's a painful life that he's given, but he cannot do otherwise.
I'm not sure I would agree with you. I think, at the end of the day, he's got to exert some freedom. I mean, freedom is such a part of the biblical idea, the Bible's worldview. How could it be that this person is really, not free? And he's got the greatest freedom possible, which is the freedom and the ability to create literally out of nothing things that are to this day inscribed on monuments throughout the world. When you think about, Jeremiah, of course, and nobody matches the power of Isaiah, the second Isaiah. And we're jumping a little ahead in the calendar here, but the words "Nachamu, Nachamu Ami," I comfort you, comforting my people, and these are these together with other passages in these chapters. They are not encoded in Jewish. They're really the the core of much of the way we understand ourselves. So they're free people, is what I'm saying. They're not they're in service to God, but they're also completely free in the way that they express
Well,
themselves.
it's a great polarity that you're talking about, because on the one hand, it's quite true that the artistry of these books suggests a great deal of skilled, crafted expression. And what is it in Charles Dickens in the French Revolution? What's that?
Tale of Two Cities.
Yeah, here what does he go? He goes to the guillotine and
It's a
says,
far better thing that I've done than I've done.
he's got no choice, and yet he chooses it, right? Here I stand, I can do no other, right? That sense that you accept this mission, even though it's very, very difficult. I just want to say one thing about, I think modern people, because if anybody showed up on the street, no matter how poetic they were, and said that they had a message from God, we would think that the person probably was having a delusion. And in fact, one of the most famous, probably the most famous story in rabbinic literature, the passage known as the Tanur Shel Achnai in Tractate Bava Metzia, is this passage in which Rabbi Eliezer is unsuccessful in persuading his colleagues about the truth of the specific detail of the position is not important, and that's actually part of the story. It's a really, really Pikayun story, Pikayun legal question. And he says, I'm just right. And he invokes miracles to prove it. And God comes out of the woodwork and finally says, he's right. I'm telling you, he's right. And the consensus of the sages is, you don't get to say, I know because God told me. You have to persuade us, and you have not made good enough arguments. And we live in human society without God breaking through and just telling you, I'm just right. Now, that said, we modern people, I think, because prophecy is very, very far from our consciousness, and we have kind of a standard epistemology, like proper behavior like the way you know anything else from evidence and from argument. So we get really excited about these questions of prophetic charisma. One thing that I want to say about these passages in Jeremiah and Isaiah at the beginning, and then later on, second Isaiah, which we'll read after Tisha B'Av, the messages of comfort, they're just soaring, they're beautiful, they're not hard to lose your heart to these passages. But what I want to say about the beginning of like Jeremiah and Isaiah is these guys, if I may say, they had some stones. They were not afraid to stand up to the community and say the most controversial, the least encouraging. They were brave people. I'll give you an example. Now, here's a passage in the first chapter of Isaiah, which will be the haftarah on Parashat Devarim, just before in this year, the day of Tisha B'Av. Shimu dvar Adonai kitzine Sdom, ha'azinu Torat Eloheinu, Amorah. He speaks to the Jewish people and says, oh, chieftains of Sodom, listen up, you people of Amorah. Lama li rov zivchechem. I'm tired of you and your stupid sacrifices. You are boring me. You have done all the wrong things. I'm going to give you a path towards return, because Isaiah will go on and say, even if your sins are as red as crimson, they can once again be dyed snow white. But he stands up in the hearing of all the Jewish people and say, you know who you guys are? Sodom and Gomorrah. You are Sodom and Gomorrah. And the thought of a prophet speaking to God, not telling them, how terrific they are, but telling them the very painful truths of their failings. I'm impressed with their fearlessness.
So I just have to add here, listening to you recite those verses and comment on them, Jeremy, when we think of Sodom and Gomorrah, the first person that comes to mind is not Isaiah, but Abraham. And Abraham argues with God on behalf of Sodom and Gomorrah. But Isaiah is taking God's point of view. And I think that we may have our disagreement, Elliot, is that I think that the prophet is liberating for the people that hear his words. Not unlike great artists, whatever their field is, music, literature, or the fine arts, can create stuff, art that moves people that experience it, but it doesn't necessarily make that person very happy. They're not necessarily the people we want to be friends with.
No, I'm thinking about poets that I have met over the course of the years. Some who are impressive and some who are not. And one in particular, a Canadian poet. I went to his lecture, and he was a rather fiery individual, and fully possessed of his own persona, and really walking that walk, and the hair, and the medallion, and the and all of that.
We're
And
jealous of hair, of
I
course.
know, but it's the
Some
point
of us
is
more
that
than others.
they there's a certain role, and in a way, we were talking about the aspiration for prophecy, which it's talked about, like, for example, Maimonides aspired, or even Heschel aspired, or Mordecai. People who were trying to encapsulate and to convey their sense of God to the world, almost in the way that the prophet did. And of course they did. I mean, Jeremy, you met Elie Wiesel. We've all heard the late Elie Wiesel talk in lectures. He had a kind of demeanor about him, an aura about him. He was a very gentle and kind person. Yortzeit was a few weeks ago. But he, when you say prophet, a modern prophet, maybe people would identify him as one. Would you think, or not?
Well, I think I mean, it's interesting because you just mentioned, person who was a Shoah survivor, whose most famous and intense writings. First of all, he never let go of God in a relationship, but he also wrote that God went up in the smokestacks, and so the ambivalence of faith and non-faith. Um, there was a prophetic character or style, but in somebody who was not full of that rage. Like MLK in the United States is the person who I think embodies at some level, in the power of his poetic expression, in the fearlessness of his commitment, in his leadership of people. Martin Luther King seems like the person in modern life that if we could try to imagine who Isaiah was, like MLK, I think comes to mind. But I'm thinking about another Jewish book, by the way. This is just a quotation from Tractate Avodah Zarah, but it forms the structure of Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzato's Mesilat Yesharim. Is you take these steps, and they're like cleanliness and abstinence and discipline and and they will all lead you ultimately to have prophecy. And that's what it says in the Gemara. And then he builds his ethical argument about that. And what it seems to be, what he's saying is that you can live an excellent life in a way that brings you very, very close to the divine, maybe even have that sense of, Heschel's, like you said, prophetic sympathy, or the feeling of divine pathos, like you're really in there with the divine. But I don't think that this kind of charismatic stuff is the exact same as the poetic speak truth to power and tell the people the difficult message. And that, I think people like that. People will say, we need a prophetic voice on climate change, or we need a prophetic voice, about racism, and all those things. What they mean is they want somebody with that soaring poetic power to say, this is the way it really is and really must be. And I'm going to tell you some difficult stuff. And when I do that, I'm going to inspire you to pursue it, and even to live your life in consonance with that commitment.
I've spoken about this in my shul, and how, in some ways we are bereft of great oratory today. We are not the era of oratory. And you know what? We've had epoch-making events over the last, I don't know, 20-something years, starting with 9/11 and before. where we could have used some good oratory rather than go out and shop, or you know, even over the last couple of years, where we feel that there are convulsions going on, and that we're looking for just someone to shape our experiences. Give me a word. Give me a 4 score and 7 years ago. Give me something, and it's we're looking for that, and we're not finding it. It's not coming out of music. It's not coming out of popular culture. It's not coming out of modern poetry. It's not coming out of movies or theater. And
First of all, it's very interesting in American life because whatever else is true, the cadence of the Black church is what I think rings in the American ears. And when Amanda Gorman gave that, poetry, the poem on the Biden
yeah,
inauguration, and Maya Angelou did it at the Clinton inauguration, certainly Martin Luther King. And by the way, Barack Obama had some of that same cadence, like that to the American ear, I think is what people soar on. And, for whatever that's worth, and to whatever degree people feel like us white Jewish people feel like you can have some of that, or it's just not accessible to people like us. I don't know.
I don't think it's accessible to the culture. I don't think the culture is in tune with that. And it's a longer conversation. It has to do with just where are we, and where are we getting our spiritual infusions in language, and when everything is reduced to 20 seconds on TikTok, we're in trouble, and
So
it takes more than 20 seconds to read, the first chapter of Jeremiah, that's for sure. Go ahead, Barry.
I would make the suggestion that the image, I think, in secular society of the prophet is the voice calling out in the wilderness. And that image is of the prophet in the wilderness. But I think today, we might say poetically, we are all in the wilderness. And it's very difficult to hear the voice when you're there rather than to hear it from afar. The prophet can inspire if we are ready to listen. And it's striking, Jeremy, that you mentioned the Reverend Martin Luther King, because his life and death suggests that there is a tragic dimension even today in the prophetic voice. And I was struck by the comment about Elie Wiesel, Zechrono Livracha. When I was in high school, I read all of his books. He'd only written 8 or 10 by then. And they were all infused with the Holocaust. But as he got older, even though the Holocaust was never far from what he was writing about, he wrote about so much more. He had the Bible tales, he had other tales and he was fortunate, I think, to have lived a long life, that he was able to transcend the tragedy of his early life with a long life as a survivor. But not everyone is privileged to do that. And he could only inspire people who are willing to listen. If you were, as I'm sure you remember, when he asked President Reagan, not to go to Bitburg, Reagan said, "I'm going to go."
Yeah, but it was a great moment. It was quote unquote a prophetic moment. It was Nathan speaking to David. It was Isaiah. It was the rebuke. It was the public rebuke of the leader of the free world. Bitburg, it's not your Mr. President. It is not your place. Your place is with the survivors. Your place is with the victims. And those words, still, I mean, years later, decades later, they give a chill.
They do, but I think what people see when they look back is that Reagan went to Bitburg. The voice that they remember is secondary to the event.
But it's framed. No, we Jews, we framed that visit with Elie Wiesel, and that's the point. And maybe this is we're kind of ending our time here, which is the prophetic readings that we are served up with over these weeks, the weeks now and the 7 weeks after Tisha B'Av. They frame the way we process the events of thousands of years ago, 2,000 years. If we didn't have Isaiah, second Isaiah, look, we wouldn't be here. There's
100% correct.
Well, we wouldn't have the show today. I would grant you that.
100% correct. You
No,
know,
because it lifted up the spirits of the people, and it enabled the people to say, you know what, there is hope. We can go on.
but
Our
this has to
mourning
apply.
will end. Go ahead.
Totally agree, but this has to apply also to the first part. That is to say, um, you know, the rabbis say that Isaiah is all Nechama and Jeremiah is all Tochecha and Ezekiel is split 50-50. That's probably not correct about any of them, because there's correction in Isaiah and there's hope in Jeremiah, and Ezekiel, God knows what that guy was doing. So I don't know if it was 50-50, but we would not be here were it not for second Isaiah. It kept the spirits of the Jewish people alive. It's those words are the most stirring in the entire Hebrew Bible. But we also need those first chapters and the seriousness of the critique. Natan to David, you are the, you know,
Or that man.
you are the guy who has abused the poor. But I want to just point out something. There are listeners maybe don't know this thing. The Tractate Sanhedrin, very, very long tractate, and then Tractate Matot, three other chapters at the end of it. It's really one big long tractate, even though we divide it into two. It's really one, about judicial process and crime, and long sections about all the various averot, all the transgressions and the punishments that come with them, death penalty, etc. And in the very last page of Matot. So if you think of it as one long tractate, you were talking about, 140 folio pages of Talmud. They say that there's 613 mitzvot. Can't we boil them down? Can't we sort of organize them? And then they take citations from, there's one from the Psalms of David, but then the rest are Isaiah and Hosea and Micha and ultimately we end up with Habakkuk and Amos. Those things come from the prophets, who, these are not, this is like after all this legal stuff, and we ask about the 613 mitzvot, then they start telling us about things like Dirshu, Asut Stakab, Dirshu Mishpat, or, whatever the, Dirshu, I forget the words right now, Asot Mishpat V'avat Chesed.
Seek God and live, and the man lives by his faith.
Yeah, Tzaddik be'emunato yichya. The prophets are the people who not only tell you the rules, but they tell you the overall sweep.
Yeah.
And they not only tell you what to do and what the story means, but they give it that poetic shaping to tell you how to feel about it and to tell you what you're looking for, not only in the rules, but the beyond the rules, and not only in the story, but beyond the story. And so one of the reasons why I would say we wouldn't be here without second Isaiah or first Isaiah or Jeremiah or the rest of them is the religion couldn't endure and make sense unless we actually have not only do this, do that, be rewarded with this and be punished with that, but here's what you're seeking in mishpat and staka and chesed and all the virtues that make this religion real.
Absolutely.
So what I would add to what you said, and you expressed it very beautifully, Jeremy, is that what second Isaiah brings us to is the Yamim Noraim, because in the calendar, we're going to have the 7 weeks of comfort, and that's going to be followed by Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and then of course the festival of Sukkot. And it may be that what second Isaiah allows us is to bring us to Yamim Noraim, to the days of awe and to the day of judgment as individuals. Many years ago, I thought that we have these 3 weeks because our redemption as individuals first depends on us locating ourselves as part of a people. So we mourn historically these 3 weeks, the destruction of the temple, but that is to prepare us for our personal redemption, which we hope each year we will be vouchsafed by God at the conclusion of Yom Kippur. And in order to get us there, we need to hear the prophetic voice. So it may be that the prophets speak more to us as individuals than they do as a people.
So we made this excursion away from the journey in the desert, but what you're saying, Barry, is that we're on a different kind of trajectory now, a different kind of path. And this week we are completing in the diaspora the book of Bamidbar Matot Masei together, and everywhere we're completing the book of Bamidbar. Chazak, chazak, v'nit chazek. We should be strong, and together strengthen each other, and dip into the words of the prophet. It's difficult, complicated material, challenging material, but if we can be somehow moved by the things that they have said, and really start a conversation about, well, what is it that they're trying to say to us, and what is it that we need to hear, and how passionate and engaging they were, and how we have all been shaped and framed by these words. I think that will be a great conversation. In the meantime, I want to thank you all for watching, listening to us, and say Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
We'll see you again next week on another edition of Parsha Talk. Beautiful.